I have to tell you, we're up to Yehoshua perek, and I'm so excited. I have to tell you, I'm just so excited to we have only 15 psukim today in our journey through Nach, but like these 15 psukim are unbelievable. There's we're going to learn so much. It's going to give such a profound perspective on our on the way we understand the Torah. Forget Nach itself. This is going to change the way we look at many sections in the Torah. So let's jump straight in. Let's just put ourselves back into context to understand where we are in the timeline of things. The nation of Israel have just now moved from Transjordan into the land of Israel itself proper. They've crossed the Jordan River. The Jordan River stood up. They brought these monuments, these rocks from the riverbed, and now they're in the land of Israel. And why this is such a critical moment is because the Torah actually talks about numerous things the nation of Israel needs to do when they move into the land of Israel. Now they're there. So now we're sort of sitting on the edge of our seats figuring out what are they going to do based on all the things they were told when they're going to come into the land of Israel. Now, not all of them are available right yet because they're not exactly farming their land yet for all the, we'll call agricultural mitzvot yet. But we certainly have a lot of things, and we're going to see some of those things right now today that they're about to do. This is in the breathing space between the attack on Jericho, on Yericho, because that's going to be next perek, is going to be the first battle against the Canaanite nations. But before then, we have a few spiritual preparations which are taking place, and that is today. So we're going to look at this. We're going to break the perek up into 4 sections. The first one is the Torah giving us a little bit of perspective, Tanakh giving us a little bit of perspective. It tells us what happened to the reverberations, the political, social reverberations of the crossing of the Jordan. So Tanakh tells us when all the kings of Canaan heard about what had happened, then all their hearts melted. They didn't have any. They were completely vanquished already, in a sense. They were really feeling. They realized they were not up against your average, group of Bedouins that have now entered the land of Israel, and they were very concerned. So that's the first thing. That sort of closes the story of crossing the Jordan. Now we move into the next one, which is this communal circumcision, which is a very odd description. It describes that they took charvois tzurim, which is these sharp rocks. That was the surgical equipment de jour, and they did a communal circumcision of all of the males right there in the Transjordan. It does not mention anything about anesthetic. So this was all done right there in a place called Gilgal, right there in on the Transjordan. And we're told the way it's described is somewhat strange because first of all we're told that take these sharp stones, and circumcise the nation of Israel a second time. Generally speaking, you can only have one circumcision. So you have to understand what that means precisely. What does it mean to have a second circumcision? Well, over here. And what makes it more complicated is in the continuing psukim, is it goes on to describe that they were not circumcised throughout the course of being in the desert, in the wilderness. This was the first time that they were able to do it, and this is when they did the circumcision, which is why it's a communal circumcision, because otherwise it's done at 8 days old. So we have to try to untangle that in a moment. After we get to that, we move into the next section, which is the first Korban Pesach. Why the first Korban Pesach? Because let's recount. What was the specific date that was given? The singular date, which helps us frame all of what we've been doing, is the date we were given of the crossing of the Jordan was on the 10th of Nisan, right? And so we have the circumcision process, and then we eat the Korban Pesach, because when is the Korban Pesach sacrificed? On the afternoon, the 14th of Nisan, to be eaten on the night of the 15th. That's the process. So they've circumcised themselves. Now they eat the Korban Pesach, and then we have this remarkable pasuk which we're going to spend a bit of time on, God willing, soon in pasuk Yud Aleph. They ate from the Korban Pesach. They ate from the Tfuas Aretz, from the Avura Aretz, the produce of the land. So now they're eating from the actual land of Israel the next day. And right then, and the manna stops falling. The manna stops sustaining them at this point in time. And this is a transition between bread from the heaven, bread from the earth, which happens right now on this first Korban Pesach. Incredible. We'll get to try to unpack that a little bit. And then finally, we have this very bizarre situation that happens at the end of the perek. Again, this is only for 15 psukim, but this is so much packed in here. Is Yehoshua is on the outskirts of Jericho, is on the outskirts of Jericho, and at night he meets the Specter, some sort of vision, some sort of angel. The Ralbag says he was sleeping. Most of the Mephoshim understand it was actually a real interaction, and it's an armed, sort of this armed specter, this armed image, and he doesn't know if it's in opposition or for him. And the fellow, this image answers, and this is like lahavdil. This is sort of Hamlet. Seeing, this is the image of it, sort of like the armed image of the ghost, right? Appearing. Yeah, listen, Shakespeare had to get it from somewhere. So here we have it, and he says, "Are you with us? You against us?" And he says, "Ata basi, I've come now," which is not really an answer. And he says, "You've got to take off your shoe because you're on a holy land." That's it. And that was the whole interaction. We don't have instructions. We don't have explanations. It's just that's the end of it. And it's very enigmatic. And then the story continues as if nothing happened. So we have to try to figure out what this is. So let's start off for the first one. I was curious, just myself, is, here we have this, again, the Tanakh emphasizes so many times, the nations of Canaan are really scared, right? They're really scared about what happened, certainly after the Jordan crossing. I was wondering, can we go back? Can we hear their voices? It'd be interesting to hear their voices, and the answer is yes, we actually can. Because actually pretty recently, they discovered in what's called the Amarna letters. What are the Amarna letters? These are cuneiform. Cuneiform is the way they used to communicate in those days, is they would take clay, like dried mud, and they would take reeds, and they would inscribe them. What cuneiform was the form of Ugaritic writing they would use in those days to send letters. And these would dry, they would form like solid clay, and then you'd have a letter, right? So it wasn't writing on papyrus or paper. They didn't have paper in those days. So they would send these little tablets with the writing as notes to each other. So the good news is that they stay a lot longer than biological material like papyrus or parchment, right? Those go away after quite soon. And so they found an area called Amarna, which was a large Egyptian area in Egypt. You can see it's on the Nile Delta. Put just a map in over here, where they found a significant amount of correspondence diplomatic correspondence from the Middle East. And so they have these all on display in various museums around the world, and we have the transcripts of all of them, which is really fascinating. So we're going to look at Amarna letter, what is called in archaeology E8299. So this is the Amarna letter they found in Egypt, and they only found this in the last few decades. But here's what it says. This is from the Yapahu, which is the ruler of Gezer. Okay, the ruler of Gezer is one of the cities, a Canaanite city. So here's the west. It's the west of Jerusalem, and he. This is what it says. And so this is a translation into English. He was not writing in English. It's a translation from the Ugaritic. So paragraph 1: to the king, my lord, my God, the sun from the sky. So he's writing a letter, by the way, to Egypt, right? And he's asking for reinforcements. But this is the way he describes him. He sort of gives his affections to the king. He says, "Message of Yapahu, the ruler of Gazru, your servant, the dirt at your feet." Right, so you can obviously see he's definitely, he's just trying to flatter him right now. The groom of your horses. Right, so this is a king saying, "I'm going to," he's trying to give it great affection to this king. "Truly, I fall at the feet of the king, my lord, my God, my son, the sun from the sky, 7 times and 7 times on my stomach and on the back." Now, we're going to come back to this description of the sun, because this is going to be really significant in battles of Jerusalem later on. "I've listened to the words of the messenger of the king, my lord, very carefully. May the king, my lord, from the sun from the sky, take thought for his land, since the Apiru or the Habiru are stronger than we. May the king, my lord, give me help." And this is in the reverse, the bottom edge, because it's written on 3 sides. "And may the king, my lord, get me away from the Apiru, lest the Apiru destroy us." So this is he's describing this as clearly he's outnumbered, militaried by this group called the Apiru, and he's saying, "Egypt, please, I'm the groom of your horses. Please send us military help." That's essentially what he's saying, and with a number of flattery thrown in there as well. It is worthwhile knowing that many academic scholars wonder who the Apiru are, because they mentioned in many of these letters. And so it is important to know that in this region, the P and the B are interchangeable, right? Right. So that's, whenever, you go to Ben Gurion Airport and they roll down the window, right? So they are, that is, racial classification. They are trying to figure out, are you Arab or Israeli? One of the interesting differences is how you pronounce your B's, right? Your B's and P's are interchangeable in Arabic. Right, just so you should know that. That's right. So Israelis don't have that issue, but that's what they're listening for. One of the things they're listening for to identify the difference. They're profiling, and so in the ancient languages, the B and the P are, which means that the hapiru is also abiru, right? Habiru, right? And of course that relates to very clearly the word aver. Aver is the word of the Semitic nation called Israel, which was Avram ha'ivri. Aver, why Abiru is the same three letters. Aver, Abiru, right? So we're talking about a Semitic, a descendant of Aver who's coming in, and we really need help because we're going to be destroyed. So to me, it's just really fascinating to hear the echo. Tanakh is telling us what they're saying, but it's fascinating to hear what they're saying themselves, right? This is them. Right, and we have a number of these letters. This is one of the more explicit ones about as they're coming in. They are terrified. So just understand what Tanakh is saying. This is we're actually hearing the voices of the folks who are saying this is fascinating. We're going to come back to these letters a little bit closer as we actually get to the battles of Jerusalem and the heartland. Right now we're on the borders. Right, so we're just beginning the process. But this is really fascinating to do this. We don't need these to prove the Tanakh. Just to clarify this, we're good with this. But it is fascinating to hear the voice from the outside, which is very much augmenting the description over here. Now, a few little pieces over here. So they're now doing bris milah, and the Tanakh tells us they weren't really doing bris milah in the wilderness. So you say they weren't doing bris milah? But wasn't that like one of the 613 commandments? In fact, not only was it one of the 613 commandments, it came before the 613 commandments. We know that Avram was told at the end of Parshas Lech Lecha, that's way back, that this is going to be my covenant between you and all your generations, that the 8th day you'll circumcise male children. So like they dropped that? How could they drop that? We don't have the license to pick and choose. So the Gemara talks about this. The Gemara in Yevamos describes this whole discussion in source 4. It says, why didn't they circumcise themselves? Because they were concerned. Look, they didn't have the requisite medical possible, we'll call it equipment. They were moving. They were trying. There was going to be fatalities, right? If you start doing a road trip circumcision, there's going to be children who will die, right? So they ceased because at that point in time they weren't able to do this. In fact, to deepen it, if you look at the way that the camping is described in Parshas Ba'aloscha, it describes that it could be just when the cloud goes up, then everybody has to travel. Just statistically speaking, there are children who are going to be born, and sometimes it could be that they were there for like 2-3 days. So that, let's say they circumcise the baby, and later that afternoon they have to move, right? They had no way of knowing how long were they going to be staying in one place, which means that there's going to be fatalities. There are going to be children who will die. So they did not. So they because of pikuach nefesh. That's option number 1. The Gemara then says, they were lacking a certain northerly wind, which was going to facilitate the healing. And the Gemara says, the northerly wind didn't blow in that time. The Gemara says, why not? That's a long time. 40 years is a long time for the wind not to blow. So the Gemara says, my Tami boy say mishum de nizufim hayu. They were censured. It was meaning they weren't supposed to be there for 40 years. They were supposed to be there for a much shorter period, and it was their fault they were there that long. But another reason is boy say nibadur ananei kavod. Is that the clouds of glory surrounding them, and Hashem did not want to scatter these clouds of protection, and thereby the byproduct of that, the outcome, the collateral impact was that they couldn't do milah because of the wind not being there. And the Radak says, let me ask you a question: is it not possible for Hashem to achieve both? Meaning, like, could Hashem not make it that the wind is not there, right? Sorry, the wind is there, and the clouds don't scatter. I mean, the clouds are doing a lot of miraculous things, right? The clouds are protecting them below their feet, and scorpions and enemies and all kinds of things are being protected from. So Hashem could not arrange that there was a wind, but it didn't scatter the miraculous clouds. So the Radak says, yes, but it's an important rule. Hashem is able to do whatever he wants. But at the same time as doing that, Hashem wants to limit the amount of miraculous intervention. Right, so he's going to organize. There's going to be clouds around them, but the clouds themselves still obey the laws of physics, If there were to be a wind, the wind would blow it away, which means Hashem is going to try as much as possible to limit the amount of miraculous intervention. And this is going to be important for us. He gives an example. When we're about to experience the Battle of Jericho, we all know the walls are going to fall down, but they still fought a battle after that. I mean, there was still a battle. When we get to Ha'ai, there's going to be an ambush. There's a whole military campaign that we're going to go through. So, meaning, Hashem says miracles, but miracles attenuated. So that's what's being said over here, which is remarkable because that attenuation actually now forfeits a mitzvah, right? That's a pretty significant thing. Nonetheless, that's what he says. And the Radak then adds one last line at the end. This is a very long essay. I just put a little part of it. Look at the end on page 4, the last line of the Radak, which is at the top. I put 1.5 lines. He says, don't make the assumption that this was against Hashem's will. Meaning, like, they didn't receive prophecy on this. Nobody said to them, don't give bris milah. They made that decision themselves. Don't say that God looked badly upon them for that. We never find any prophet saying to them, that was a bad thing, which means the silence of Tanakh is an indicator that they were doing the right thing. They made the right decision, even though they didn't always have the instructions. That's going to be something important. That's a general rule of Yehez. If there's an absence of admonishing, then it must mean they did the right thing, which is going to be helpful for Radak. So they made a human decision based on the physical circumstances, and they were correct in their decision. That's a very important perspective. We can sometimes think that every move they did was because God said it. No, not necessarily. Sometimes they had to look at the circumstances and make a decision. And that decision was a very difficult decision because in this case it was forfeiting the circumcision, but they were correct. In this case, this is appropriate as well.
In the Zufim, though, they brought it on, according to that pshat.
Then they bore, right. You're right, but it's kind of like, that situation would be, it's like, let's say a person did not prepare the medical equipment for a bris milah on Shabbos, as an example. They did not so they did not bring the knife. So in that case, what's going to happen? You can't do bris milah. You're not allowed to do bris milah in those circumstances, but you were responsible for having created those circumstances, right? So, meaning, we're blamed for the circumstances. I went to a specific place, and because I went to a specific place, it was not a good environment, and so I sinned. So who's responsible? I couldn't make a decision. Yeah, but you put yourself in that circumstance, so that's a little bit of that. So, yeah. Okay, so now the second circumcision. What does it mean the second circumcision, right? So if they're not circumcised in the desert, that means to say that all the young men who are of that generation had not been circumcised for 40 years, right? So that means to say unless you're over 40 years old, you didn't have a circumcision, right? According to this. So then what does it mean they had a second circumcision? Doesn't make sense. So the Gemara tells us that there is actually a second, Yehoshua is introducing a second part of the circumcision process. And that is what's called priya. What the Gemara describes this is that the membrane which is removed over the male organ has 2 layers of skin. And what was done at the times of Avram Avinu was removing the outer layer of skin. Yehoshua introduced even removing the thinner membrane, the inner membrane, which was done through priya, which was tearing that off. What is interesting is that today, actually, our Moalim are less sensitive to this, and when they cut the foreskin, they do both these levels of the skin and the membrane together. But in the old days, actually, if you look at at halachic literature, it seems to be that people would actually separate. They do two separate stages of the outer skin and the membrane as well, which is fascinating. And the second level of milah was introduced at the time of Yehoshua. So that's what shenis means, which is now also very helpful. It's monumental for us in the sense that here we have a new part of law being introduced. Meaning, Avram Avinu was told milah, and now we have priya, which is removing that inner membrane, is a new introduction of Yehoshua to the law which we keep. This is going to be called an element of what's called Torah Sheba'al Peh, in a sense, right? This is oral Torah being introduced into the written Torah. That's very helpful. We're going to see lots of examples of this, but just to understand the progression of the halachic development here, if that's the case according to the Gemara. That is a new stage. Now, why now? Why do they need to do milah now? So the most obvious answer is they've left the desert, they got the wind, they're not moving, they can now circumcise medical facilities, right? All those things. But there's another reason why it's the first thing they do when they come into the land of Israel, and that is because they need to bring the Korban Pesach. Remember, they cross the Jordan on the 10th, Pesach's on the 14th. Folks, we have a very short window to be able to eat the Korban Pesach because we know the Torah tells us Kol orel lo yechabai. You are not allowed to eat it if you're uncircumcised, which means that any below 40-year-old male is not allowed to eat the Korban Pesach unless they have their circumcision process. So the window is short, which is why they need to do it right now, which is incredibly fascinating, because we know that of all the positive commandments in the Torah, right, there's 248 positive commandments, 365 negative commandments. The negative commandments have varying different weights of punishments associated with transgressing them, because you actually had to do something, right? So breaking Shabbos, God forbid, right? Eating treif. These are transgressions that a person transgresses. There's different weights associated with the punishments related to them. But when it comes to the positive commandments, let's say a person doesn't do a positive commandment. That's not actually doing. That's just not doing, right? That's sort of passivity. So in that case, the weighting is usually less than the negative commandments. Make sense, right? Meaning, say, I missed the opportunity, and you'll never, in many cases, it won't ever come back in the same way. But it's not like I did something bad. I just missed something good. And there's consequences for those such actions, right? That's what the Vilna Gaon says in the Mishnah in Perek, which is, Asi litain din v'cheshbon. Din is all the things you did, and cheshbon is all the things you didn't do. That's a terrifying thought. All the things you didn't do with your life, right? So the cheshbon is the lack of positive doing. There are two mitzvahs in all the positive mitzvahs that if a person doesn't do, they have a very significant punishment, and that is kares, being excommunicated, early death, God forbid, children being cut off. It's a really bad. It's a very bad spiritual punishment. It's the highest level of a spiritual punishment, called kares. There are only two positive commandments in the entire Torah which are associated with that, and they are Korban Pesach and Bris Milah, right? And the two are always interconnected. In Egypt, when they first brought the Korban Pesach, they circumcised the males before being able to have the Korban Pesach, because that was the prerequisite. And here again, in a certain sense, a replica, the microcosm of that national moment is happening once again here. Circumcision and Pesach. We say this at every Bris Milah. What do we say? The pasuk from Tanach, which is V'avar alayach v'arech misposeses b'damayich v'amalach b'damayich chayi. You live in your blood. We say it twice because it reflects two sets of blood: the blood of Milah and the blood of Korban Pesach. Those are two sacrifices the nation of Israel have been asked to make. Then at Exodus, and now in the introduction to the land, it's seen as these two sacrifices come hand in hand next to each other. So that's what the Muslim Mepharshim say. Why do they need to do it now? Because they needed to eat the Korban Pesach. The women were fine, right? And the men who are over 40 seem to be all right. But any male below 40 who has been 40 years worth of circumcision missing would be missing the train. So that's why this is necessary right now. So there's a lot of pressure. You can imagine that there were a lot of people taking it easy before Pesach after having had gone through their circumcisions. Now, what is interesting is the Ralbag notices something else. And again, this is why it's so deep. He notices an interesting thing is that if you go back, I did not put this in the notes but he says it here, I put it in for reference. He says, when the mitzvah of Bris Milah was originally given, this is how it's framed. Listen to this. This is Avraham Avinu being told about it. In Lech Lecha, eternal intergenerational covenant. Hashem says to Avraham Avinu, good. Liyos lecha le'elokim to your God, v'zarecha acharecha, v'nosati lecha le'zarecha acharecha es eretz megorecha, es kol eretz ha'knan la'achuzas ha'olam, v'yisi lachem le'elokim. I'm giving you this covenant, I'm giving you the land. Says the Ralbag, interesting. It seems to be almost as if the prerequisite to getting the land is circumcision, which makes so much sense. What do? They come into the land and they circumcise themselves. Meaning, they're doing exactly what it says, but to Avraham Avinu. Amazing. And says the Ralbag even further, which makes sense why it was that they circumcised right as they got out of Egypt, because what was the plan? The game plan was Sinai, Israel, right? That was the plan. They were going to leave Sinai, going to Israel. So that circumcision was the prerequisite to going to the land of Israel. They took a little bit of a detour because of their own mistake. But really they should have gone in, meaning circumcision is always seen as the doorstep into the land of Israel, meaning the covenant is the prerequisite. That's what Ralbag observes, which is fascinating because there's so many different angles we can look at this to appreciate this. Now we get to, I would say this is the most profound observation. Before even there, there's so many pieces here. It says, after they do the circumcision, that the Tanakh over here says, now I've removed from you es cherpas Mitzrayim, the disgrace of Egypt. That's what it says in Pasuk Tes. Hayom galoisi es cherpas Mitzrayim elakem. I've removed the disgrace of Egypt from upon you after the circumcision. Why is this the disgrace of Egypt? So the most basic idea is that Egypt in general was zirmas susim zirmasam. it was a pretty immoral, loose kind of society when it came to sexual boundaries. So what's happening over here is that as you come to the land of Egypt, your society is not going to be run the same way. And as a symbol of that, you're going to have a bris milah, which is the limb, which of course for males have trouble, regulating and making sure that society is going to be a society which is chaste, a society which is pure, a society not reflecting Egypt. So Hashem is saying, Cherpas Mitzrayim means your society is going to be cleaner, is going to be more moral than the society you left behind. That's what that Cherpas Mitzrayim means. That's the way that's the way it's understood in the by the Ralbag. However, Rashi points out that there might be another element of disgrace here which is being removed, and that is, if you remember, when Moshe Rabbeinu is negotiating on Har Sinai in Parashat Kisisa, it says, Moshe Rabbeinu says to Hashem that the nation of Egypt is going to say, Bara Hoitziam. He took about Bara, right? Now, it happens to be, if you just do a little bit of studying of Egyptology, you will notice that Ra does not just mean bad. Ra is a god, right? That's why it's called Ramesses, right? Ramesses, the king of Egypt. There are many Ramesses. Ramesses means child. Ra is the god, right? So, which is why Moses is called Messis, right? Makes sense? He was a child, right? So, Messis was the child. Ramesses was the child of God, right? So, Bara itself means they took them out under the sign of Ra, which means Moshe Rabbeinu was saying to Moshe Rabbeinu, here's the argument on Har Sinai when defending the nation of Israel. You took them out of Egypt, but you took them out under the star sign of Ra, which means I see in their future blood. There's going to be blood. And now what you're doing is you are now falling straight into the Egyptian prediction. You're going to kill them, and they're going to say, Bara Hatziyam. They took them out. You see, they were going to die. We saw there was blood in the future. It's done. You could vanquish Egypt for a moment. Maybe it was the right time, but you could not ultimately succeed in bringing them out. You've now fallen into the Egyptian prediction. Rashi says, this moment in time now untwirls or unravels that entire process. Why? Because there is blood. It's just a different blood. Meaning, now that the blood is spilled of the nation of Israel, why? Because they were keeping the mitzvah of Milah. Bara Tzam, yes, there was blood in the future, but it wasn't the blood you were thinking about. And that's the Cherpas Mitzrayim, is up till now they've been living in the shadow of that prediction of death. No longer, it's all done. Amazing, right? Isn't it a remarkable perspective? That's all right here. That's all just in these psukim. And now we get to really I would say just the meat of this perek, because this is all just hors d'oeuvres. Just to appreciate what's happening is what happens now. We have this incredible transition between the manna and the grain, right? There's actually a very fascinating tshuva written by, if I'm not mistaken, the Arugas Aboisim, talking about like what would the bracha be when they were in the desert and they ate the manna? Like what bracha was it? It's not hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Probably was hamotzi lechem min hashamayim, right? So that was probably what was happening there, because it wasn't. So here we have this transition between lechem min hashamayim and lechem min haaretz. Okay, so we have this transition that happens literally in this perek right here, and we're told specifically about how it works. There's a discussion as to when did the manna precisely stop. The Abarbanel quotes, it's very interesting, the Abarbanel does this, he quotes the Zohar. The Abarbanel quotes the Zohar that says that the manna is described as Kizra Gad Lavan. Kizra Gad, right? All these words are very hard to translate, but he points out the Zohar says that it's like the tribe of Gad, which means that what? It remained on the east bank of the Jordan, meaning the manna was like Gad, Kizra Gad, Lavan. It remained on the east bank of the Jordan because the manna accompanied them with Moshe Rabbeinu's help till the land of Israel. Now it stopped. Now they're in the land of Israel, the manna stops, the lechem nashamayim stops. And there's a whole discussion about this. The Mefarshim try to figure out what went on here. Rashi says it stopped when Moshe Rabbeinu died, but they kept extras in their kalim, they kept extras and they ate until this point in time. The Abarbanel says no, it went until the point that they entered the land of Israel, because that's based on the Zohar, that they entered the land of Israel. So now we have the manna stopping. Okay. And now we have this really this incredible pasuk which describes their eating. Let's go back to that pasuk for just a moment, because these two psukim are really important. It's on page 2. On page 2, just bear with me over here as we read through this. The pasuk says in pasuk Yud Aleph and Yud Beis. Let's read these two psukim together and try to appreciate what's going on over here. It says Vayachlu me'avur haaretz mimacharas haPesach matzois v'koloi be'etzem hayom hazeh. So they ate from the produce of the land on the day after Pesach, and they on this day they ate. It was the grain that was making up their matzahs. Then it says, and the next day the man ceased. It's when they're eating from the actual produce of the land. And they ate from the produce of the land. So the Ralbag says a very interesting thing. He says, this is a description of what the Torah already said. Is the way he understands it, and again, there are different ways of reading this, but he understands it as follows. What does it mean, Mimacharas HaPesach, the day after Pesach? There are those who struggle and say it means Pesach, usually in the Torah refers to the 14th, which is when they sacrificed the Pesach. So this will be on the 15th of Nisan. But the Ralbag, the Metzudos understand, no, the eating of the Pesach. When was the eating of the Pesach? It was on the 15th. So Mimacharas HaPesach means on the 16th of Nisan. Now, that day is a significant day. Why is the 16th of Pesach a significant day, specifically agriculturally, and when it relates to grain? That was the day when they would bring the Korban HaOmer, right? So let's just recap. What does the Torah tell us about this? So come with me as we look at this. Look at source 14. The Torah tells us in Parshas Emor, and now let's read this as if we've never seen this before. The Torah tells us, it describes the festival of Pesach, and then it says, when you come to the land which I'm giving to you, which is now, right now as it's describing, you'll bring the first of the sacrifice of the grain to the priest, and then it describes you'll bring this korban, you'll do t'nuvah, and then a few psukim later it says, and you may not eat any types of grains until this day, meaning you need to bring the Korban HaOmer to what's called Matir Chadash, which means all the grain that grew in the past year, you can only eat after you bring it to God first. And this is what's called the Korban HaOmer, and that's why we have the next pasuk is Usfartim Nachem Mimacharas HaShabbos Miyom Aviachem Es Amar Tunufa Sheva Shabbosos Tieno. You the next day you're going to bring the Korban HaOmer, and you're going to now count the Sfiras HaOmer from a Macharas HaShabbos. This has been a big this pasuk that we just read, which is pasuk Tesvavin Vayikra Tes Mechav Gimel, is a matter of major debate because there was an entire sect of a sectarian group of Jews called the Tzedakah, the Sadducees, who interpreted the Torah literally, and therefore their literal interpretation was the Mimacharas HaShabbos meant after the day after the Saturday. So the Omer always started on a Sunday, according to them, and it was the same format every year. Why? Because it says Mimacharas HaShabbos, the day after Saturday. The day after Saturday, and this is what was said. We have traditionally, the Mimacharas HaShabbos means the day after the first day of Pesach, which is the 16th of Nisan, which is why our Shavuos fluctuates. And you have to ask yourself the following question. If the Torah wanted to be very clear about it, then surely the Torah should have been clear about it, right? Surely the Torah should have told us, Mimacharas HaShabbos means Mimacharas HaPesach. Wouldn't it just be more clear to describe it that way? I mean, it's obfuscating, it's making it more complicated, it's giving the space for people to misinterpret this. So the Ralbag observes, he says, that our pasuk here in Yehoshua is a proof against the Sadducees. What does that mean? Because let's go back to our pasuk again. Our pasuk describes the eating of kali, right, which is the bread that's not allowed, and it says when did it happen? It says Mimacharas HaPesach. Right? It says Vayasos HaPesach B'Asayim, and then it says Vayachlu Me'avaros Mimacharas HaPesach. Here is Tanakh explaining what the Torah meant. That when is this to be eaten? On what day are you allowed to eat the first grain? Is the day after the first day of Pesach, as understood by a significant amount of the Mefarshim, which means that Mimacharas HaShabbos must mean Mimacharas HaPesach. So Tanakh over here is, in a certain sense, explaining what the Torah meant. But it's better than that. It's more than that. Because here we go. Again, the Torah is still being a little bit vague. But and as I was speaking to our foreman yesterday about this, he has of course he has an essay on this topic, and I was discussing like how to understand this. Here's his observation. I want to dig it a little bit deeper. It's so much more profound. If you think about it, let's remember our introduction to the Omer to the manna. Remember what's happening. The manna is disappearing. So when we go to the manna, it's interesting that the manna falls how many days a week? 6 days a week, not 7 days a week. There's double portion on Friday. Why? Because, as the Torah says, because on the seventh day, Shabbos, Shabboson, Kodesh LaHashem. It is day of, how would you translate that? Shabbos means, there?
Rest.
Not rest, that's how we translate it now. I would believe that the word Shabbos over there means cessation, right? Meaning it's the day of the ceasing of the Omer falling. Does that make sense? Meaning that's the day that the Omer ceases, which is why you get a double portion on a Friday, on Yom Shishi. Good? If that's the case, we actually have that word in Yehoshua as well. Do you notice that? Vayishpoy saman bayamahu. The man ceased. Which means, understand what's happening here. The manna, which is the first time that the word Shabbos is being used to describe a cessation, right? No, right? Vayishpoy saman, the idea of the manna ceasing is described in Parshas Beshalach when the manna first falls. The rules are it doesn't fall on Shabbos, and that's called Shabbos Shabboson because it's going to be a ceasing. We now have the historical ceasing. Vayishpoy saman bayamahu. The manna ceases on that day. That's called Mimacharas HaShabbos. What does the Torah mean when it says Shabbos? It doesn't mean Saturday. It means the day of ceasing. How are you going to know what that means? Well, the Torah told us. The Torah tell us, when you go into the land, right, then you're going to count the day after the Omer. The Torah told us that when you go into the land, that's what the Shabbos is going to be. You will understand this not now, but when you get there. When you get there, Shabbos doesn't mean Saturday. It means ceasing. That's what it means. Precisely, it was an exact description. I think it's even more than that. How much do you collect of the manna on a daily basis? What is it? Omer la Gulgoles, which means to say that the Omer is the measure of it. What is the name of the Korban on the 16th of Nisan, on the day Vayishpoy Saman, is the Korban Omer, which means that there's a much more profound perspective here. Why does God want us to bring a barley offering on the 16th of Nisan? Like, why that? So you can say, well, the barley harvest is coming into fruition just at this point in time in the year, and we want to give to Hashem before we eat. I believe it's much more profound than that. It's what happens is like this. For 40 years, you ate out of God's table, right? You ate from God's table. He gave you manna every single day. You had enough every single day. And it doesn't matter how much you collected or not, you had exactly what you needed. How do we remember that? The answer is, the day that it ceased was the 15th of Nisan. The next day you had to eat from the land. So now you bring a korban to commemorate what just happened to you. And every single year when you're about to eat the grain of the land of Israel, you remember back to that moment of Mimacharas HaShabbos. The day that what? Not Saturday. The day that the manna ceased. That's Vayishpoy Saman. Meaning, if you read Sefer Yehoshua, you understand what the Torah is really talking about. It says, when you come into the land of Israel, there's going to be this korban. It's going to be Mimacharas HaShabbos, and you're not going to understand that until you get to the land of Israel, and it stops. And now you're going to bring a korban omer, which means, why are we not allowed? Let's turn this to practical terms. Why are we not allowed to eat chadash? Certainly in Israel and in Chutz Aretz, many people keep this as well. Why are you not eating chadash before the 16th of Nisan? Is because you're remembering the manna. You're remembering God giving to the nation of Israel, providing for us for those years. That's amazing. That's what's going on. But you would never know this if it were not to be in the land of, if you were not to read Sefer Yehoshua. Make sense? Okay? All these words kind of add up and come together.
I think they brought us CSA, if I remember correctly.
Could be as well. Could be.
Let's
Let's close off to one last thought. I know we're at the end of time, but we do need to end up with this idea of this midnight specter. So we have this arrival of this ghost. It's not really a ghost. It's a malach. The specter arrives at night, confronts Yehoshua, and now Yehoshua is says to, are you with us, with our enemies? What's going on over here? What's the message? Why is this being told to us? So the most basic level, the Radak says, this is a military portent, meaning why is the malach dressed in military garb? Because they're about to enter into a battle. That's next week. That's perek vav. You're about to enter into a battle. Make sure, I'm giving you the strength to go into this battle. You're now going in. I'm with you. God is with you. You'll walk around the walls. Everything's going to fit into place. I think that makes the most sense. That's exactly what's being said over here. However, the Gemara seems to take it out of context. The Gemara says there's multiple places in Megillah, in Sanhedrin, in Adarim, in multiple places. The Gemara says, you know what this is that he's criticizing Yehoshua. He's saying to Yehoshua, you know what? You, not only did you not bring the korban this afternoon, but you also bitaltem Talmud Torah. You didn't do enough learning of Torah today. That's and Yeshua's, the conversation is why are you coming? Is Atabasi, I came now because of the concern I have right now. I always struggle with this Gemara. Like it seems to be like the Gemara is inserting a narrative, a subtext here, which doesn't make sense to the context, right? Like Bittul Torah is a really important thing, but this is like the beginning of a zman, a semester in yeshiva, and the mashgiach gets up, then he says, boys, you got to make sure not to waste time and don't spend too much time at the coffee station. But like that's not the topic here. Like where did the Gemara get the subtext from as well? So I believe that it might be that obviously the parallel of this incident has a parallel in the Torah. What's the parallel in the Torah of this incident? Of meeting a spiritual agency and removing your shoes. This. If you look at this, only one at a time where the previous leader had to remove his shoes, and that is at the burning bush, at the snare. Right. So Moshe Rabbeinu, before he started his leadership into as being the leader of Israel, he noticed the burning bush. He was told to remove his shoes, and then he's given his agency. Right. His job. Yehoshua is about to enter his job now. He's about to conquer the land of Israel. It says the spiritual revelation, which tells him to remove his shoes as well. So it should be obvious that if that's the parallel, right, it should be that these are the parallel. Where was the burning bush? Where was the burning bush found geographically? On Chorev. Chorev is Sinai, which means the place of the giving of the Torah. In fact, Moshe Rabbeinu is told in his messengership that you're going to be the leader, you're going to take these people out, I've heard their cries. Moshe Rabbeinu says, I'm not worthy of this. Hashem says, I'll give you a sign. You'll come back here and serve me on this mountain. Meaning here, right where this mountain is. This is all in the Psukim. This is not Medrash. This is very clearly in the Psukim, which means that in a certain sense, the parallel event is also very much about Torah, right? It's in a place where Torah is going to be given, right? So what I think Chazal are trying to do is they're inserting the echo of the burning bush into Yeshua's burning bush experience. But notice that it's quite different because you see, Moshe Rabbeinu is being told to do action. Yehoshua is being told to do thought, which makes sense because what is Yehoshua about to do? A lot of action. So therefore, what do you need to reaffirm? Is Torah, right? Meaning you need to reaffirm the Torah thought, the Torah framework for the action you're about to involve yourself in, because this is your mission. Meaning Moshe Rabbeinu would much have preferred to remain a shepherd and remain in the realm of thought. Hashem says the burning bush, you're going to go into the realm of action. Yehoshua over here is a general. That's how we first met him. He's about to go into battle, but Hashem says, remember, thought. Right? In a certain sense, it's the parallel over here, which I think what the Gemara is inserting into this conversation. To me, it's incredibly meaningful because today, unfortunately, there's the amount of casualties in Israel who have fallen from the religious Zionist camp is much higher than their representative ratio in society. And if you read the story about these guys, these are guys who are, they were found in their tanks, with Sfarem, where they were sitting there learning Torah while in battle. I just yesterday I met somebody who was telling me about a Dayan in Tel Aviv, right? A Dayan in Tel Aviv who operates a D9, and he's a Dayan Zarbiv. And he's been such a successful D9 operator. D9 is the major, those bulldozers that, they send in first. So he says they've actually created a verb called lezarbev, right? Based on his last name, because that's how, and he's a Dayan, right? And there he is giving Divrei Torah in the middle of, Chan Yunis. We're talking about a different level of generation. I think that the angel's reminding Yehoshua, as you're about to now pull out all the military, remember the spiritual. We're seeing a generation of this in real time, like we've never seen beforehand. Which is remarkable. I think that's what the Gemara is trying to emphasize of something which we're blessed to witness today in ways. And finally, last two observations in that this is for there's so many different levels of Tanakh. I want to just uncover the corner of a curtain over here, just so that make sure that people we never think that we know it all, right? The Ben Ish Chai wrote many Svarim. One of the Svarim he wrote, the Ben Ish Chai lived in Baghdad, one of the great Sephardic poskim and Kabbalists. He lived in the 19th century, and on the Gemara he wrote a book called the Ben Yehoyada. The Gemara Megillah, he makes an observation on the spiritual level, and again, this is for those who are deeply entrenched in the spiritual level. Just understand we don't really fully understand all the psukim based on just a cursory read. So he makes an observation. He says like this. The soul of Yehoshua and the soul of Rachav were souls which were actually transmigrating, which means they actually are here a second time. And the soul of Yehoshua was originally the soul of Yosef, which makes sense, by the way, his ancestor, right? Yehoshua is from which tribe? Ephraim. Right, so it's his answer. So this is the soul of Yosef here again. And the soul of Rachav is the soul of Eshes Potiphera is back again as well. Which meant, just to understand what the way this is being read, is she knew that in the first iteration. She knew the souls were meant to be bound up, which is why she made the proposition in Parshas Miketz. Yosef at that time did not know that, and also it was not inappropriate, meaning in that iteration that was incorrect, which is why he left, right? But now Yehoshua is about to conquer Jericho, and he's about to meet that same soul again, one time again. As we saw beforehand, that Yehoshua ends up marrying Rachav. And so the Ben Ish Chai points out that, of course, this Charaboy Shlufa B'Yadoi, the sword is in his hand. The word Cherev, of course, is the same word as Rachav, which, right, it's the same letters, of course. And so he's saying, he's telling him, you're about to enter this place, and now at this point in time, you are allowed. Shalna Lechem Ala Reglecha. You don't have to run away. You are now allowed to engage in this relationship, in this round of existence. So, and it's a much longer Ben Ish Chai. I just put a snippet of the paragraph. Just appreciate that when we think we know what's going on over here, there's a lot of other stuff that's going on over here. Spiritually, these are souls that were meant to be together, but now in this iteration, somehow it's coming back to fruition. And finally, the last observation, and I think we'll close this, and my Boris on his notes, I lost my last page. That's why, if that's all right. I just came across a really beautiful book called Me'avur Ha'aretz by Rav Avram Remer, who was actually a student of Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook. He wrote this beautiful sefer, and he said, and I just think it's such a powerful observation as to our relationship with Tanakh and relationship with Israel. He says, Ma'alach gila liYehoshua, and I want to read these words, the last source 22. This angel revealed to Yehoshua, Shekedei lichbosh es ha'aretz aleinu lahasir es hamechitzos beinenu lebeina. You want to enter the land of Israel, you want to conquer the land of Israel? You have to remove the barriers that we have between it and the land. Without any intermediaries. With associating with the land of Israel. What is he being told? Take off your shoes. Right? Feel the land of Israel with your feet, with your bare feet. Now you're going to actually make yourself part of the land. Now you're going to be moiser yourself to the land itself. Meaning say, feel the land of Israel. Right? Understand and live the land of Israel. That's why the angel's telling him over here. The message is you want to conquer it, feel it first. And that's how we're going to live. We're the Jews who are leaving Eastern Europe, living in the shtetl, and we're taking off our shoes and we're becoming the farmers in the land of Israel again. That's what's being described over here, which is remarkable. Folks, this was just 15 psukim. There's so much over here. And now, after a little bit of interaction, we're going to move straight into battle. God willing, next week. Thank you.